Picture this: you are standing at the edge of the world. The sun is a relentless hammer, beating down upon the cracked, thirsty earth. The air you breathe is thick with dust, a gritty shroud that coats your tongue and stings your eyes. In your hands, you clutch the last 2 canteens of water. One for you, and one for the small, feverish child clinging weakly to your back. His breaths are shallow, a fragile rhythm against your own frantic heartbeat. Behind you, a cloud of dust on the horizon grows steadily larger. A storm of men on horseback sent to drag you back to a life that is no life at all. Ahead of you, there is nothing but an endless expanse of sun-scorched wasteland, a shimmering, unforgiving promise of a slow and silent end. Do you turn back, surrender the boy, and submit to the gilded cage built by a man who sees you as nothing more than property? Or do you push forward into the heart of the furnace, praying for a miracle that the desert has never been known to grant? This was the impossible choice that stood before Alara, a choice between 2 kinds of death, one of the soul and one of the body. She tightened her grip on the canteen, felt the faint weight of her little brother, Leo, against her spine, and took another step into the shimmering heat. The land had a way of stripping a person down to their essential self. For days, Alara had walked, her past falling away with every agonizing mile. The memory of Mayor Thornton's soft, predatory hands and the cold finality of the marriage contract he'd waved in her father's face became a distant, hateful echo. He was a man who owned the town, its people, and its only reliable river, doling out life 1 meager bucket at a time. He had wanted Alara to complete his collection, a pretty seal on a land deed he'd acquired through usurious debt, but he had underestimated her. He had not accounted for the fierce, protective love she held for her brother, Leo, whose chronic cough and frail constitution would not survive a life under Thornton's suffocating control. And so she had run, with nothing but the clothes on her back, a few loaves of stolen bread, and a desperate, burning prayer. Now the prayer was fading, and the desert was giving its final, silent answer. Her vision began to tunnel, the edges blurring into a dark, swirling vortex. Just as her knees buckled, as the weight of Leo became an anchor pulling her down into the dust, she saw it. A dark shape on the horizon that did not shimmer. The structure, the cabin. It was solid and real, a single, stubborn punctuation mark at the end of a sentence of desolation. The man who emerged from the cabin was carved from the same harsh landscape. His face was a roadmap of sun and sorrow, with a thick, untamed beard and eyes the color of a stormy sky. A pale scar, a sliver of white lightning, ran from the corner of his left eye to the edge of his mouth, giving him a permanent look of grim contemplation. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, as if conserving every last ounce of energy. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable, his hand resting near the worn leather handle of a pistol at his hip. He was Silas, a man who had made a covenant with solitude. This barren ranch was his penance, his monastery, his tomb. Every day he performed the same ritual. He would tend to his 2 skeletal cows, patch the same fraying ropes of his corral, and then he would spend the rest of the daylight hours digging. The well was his obsession, a gaping maw in the earth that had so far yielded nothing but dust and shattered rock. He wasn't just digging for water. He was digging for absolution, trying to claw his way back to a time before the fever, before the drought, before he had to bury his wife and daughter in this same unforgiving soil. When Alara collapsed 20 yards from his porch, the canteens rolling from her grasp, something in him shifted. It was an old, rusted gear grinding into motion. He had sworn off people, their complications, their needs, their inevitable sorrows. But the sight of the woman, her face streaked with dirt and tears, and the small, still form of the child on her back, pierced through the calloused walls he had built around his heart. He saw not a stranger, but a ghost. He saw his own wife, Sarah, in Alara's fierce desperation. He saw his own daughter, Lily, in the boy's fragile state. With a groan that was more exhaustion than complaint, he lifted them both, the unexpected weight of them a strange and unwelcome ache in his arms, and carried them inside his Spartan cabin. The cabin smelled of dust, old wood, and a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical presence. He laid the boy on his own cot, the only soft surface in the room, and placed Alara in a simple wooden chair. He worked silently, efficiently, cleaning Leo's face with a damp rag, forcing a few precious drops of water between his cracked lips. He expected questions, pleas, demands. Instead, he got silence. Alara simply watched him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a gratitude so profound it made him deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't a savior. He was a gravedigger, and this land was his cemetery. He retreated to the far side of the small room, his back to them, and stared out the window at the hole in the ground that had become the center of his world. The days that followed fell into a quiet, unspoken rhythm. Alara, once she regained her strength, proved to be as resilient as the stubborn desert weeds that clung to life around the cabin. She never asked for anything. She mended Silas's worn shirts with a small needle and thread she'd kept tucked in her pocket. She swept the perpetual dust from the cabin floor. She cooked meager meals from his dwindling supplies, stretching them with a quiet ingenuity that he hadn't realized was possible. Most of her time was spent by Leo's side, humming soft, forgotten lullabies and telling him stories of a world with green trees and cool, running streams. She spoke of hope as if it were a place she remembered visiting, a place she was determined to find again. Silas watched her from a distance, a silent observer in his own home. He continued his relentless excavation of the well, the rhythmic thud of his pickaxe and the scrape of his shovel the only consistent sounds in their shared silence. Her presence was a disruption to his grief, a soft light intruding upon his carefully curated darkness. He found himself leaving a slightly larger portion of food for her, ensuring the water bucket was always full before he left in the morning, placing an extra blanket at the foot of the cot where she slept on the floor beside her brother. They were small, unconscious acts of caring he refused to acknowledge. One afternoon, the sun at its zenith, the familiar thud of his pickaxe was replaced by a sharp, jarring crack. Not the sound of rock splitting, but something else, something hollow. A shiver of something other than exhaustion ran through him. Hope, he realized with a shock, felt almost identical to fear. He dropped to his knees and clawed at the dirt with his bare hands, his fingers raw and bleeding. He uncovered not a vein of water, but the clean, sharp edge of cut stone. It was smooth, unnatural. A frenzy seized him. He dug with a manic energy he hadn't felt in years, sweat and dust plastering his hair to his forehead. Alara came to the edge of the pit, drawn by the change in his rhythm. She watched as he unearthed the impossible. A stone slab, and beneath it, the top of a staircase spiraling down into the cool, silent darkness of the earth. Without a word, Silas lit a lantern, his hands trembling slightly, and descended. The air grew cool and damp as he went deeper, a sacred chill that felt like life itself. The narrow stone steps opened into a vast, cavernous space. The lantern light danced across the walls of a massive, man-made cistern, its stone ceiling supported by thick, carved pillars. And at its center, bubbling up from a deep fissure in the rock, was a spring. The water was so clear it was almost invisible, a perfect, undisturbed pool that reflected the flickering flame of his lantern like a captured star. It was an ancient place, a forgotten sanctuary. He knelt at the edge, plunging his hands into the water. It was colder than he could have imagined, a shock of pure, clean life. He drank, and it was like drinking away years of dust and sorrow. When he emerged, blinking in the harsh sunlight, he was a different man. The madness in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet awe. He looked at Alara, who stood waiting, her expression a fragile question. He didn't speak. He simply held out a bucket filled with the clear, perfect water. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and for the first time, their eyes met not as strangers, but as survivors. She gave the water to Leo first, and as the boy drank, a flicker of color returned to his cheeks. That evening, for the first time, they spoke. He told her of Sarah and Lily, his voice rough with disuse, the words painful stones he pulled from his throat. She told him of Thornton, of the contract, of the suffocating fear that had driven her into the desert. In the shared darkness of the cabin, illuminated by a single candle, they found a fragile connection, a recognition that they were both refugees from a world that had tried to break them. The water changed everything. It was a promise kept by the earth when the sky had offered none. Silas ran a pipe from the spring to the surface, and a steady trickle of life began to transform the barren patch of land. Alara, using seeds she had carried in a small pouch, planted a garden. Tiny green shoots pushed their way through the soil with an impossible tenacity. They were small flags of defiance, a testament to a hope that had been buried but not extinguished. Leo grew stronger, his cough subsided, and his laughter, a sound Silas hadn't heard in years, began to fill the quiet spaces between the wind and the silence. The ranch was no longer a tomb. It was becoming a sanctuary, a home. But peace on the frontier is a fleeting thing, a shallow pool of water that the sun is always waiting to evaporate. A rider from Thornton's dwindling posse, tracking what he thought was a mirage, crested a ridge and saw it. An impossible patch of vibrant green in the heart of the gray, dusty plains. He stared, rubbed his eyes, and then spurred his horse, riding hard and fast back toward town with news of a miracle his master would surely want to possess. The arrival of Mayor Thornton felt like a sudden drop in temperature, a shadow falling over the sun. He rode at the head of a small group of grim-faced men. His expensive suit coated in a fine layer of dust, he seemed to wear like a cloak of authority. He dismounted with a practiced, predatory grace, his eyes sweeping over the small, flourishing garden, the steady trickle of water from the pipe, and finally, landing on Alara. His smile was thin and cold, a fissure in a block of ice. "My dear Alara," he said, his voice a silken threat. "I see you've been resourceful. But playtime is over." Silas moved to stand in front of Alara and Leo, his body a solid, unmoving shield. He was no longer the hollowed-out man Thornton's rider had described. The stoop in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a straight-backed resolve. The haunted look in his eyes had been sharpened into a protective fire. "She's not going anywhere," Silas said, his voice low and steady as bedrock. Thornton laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I'm afraid she is. You see, I have a contract." He produced a piece of paper from his coat pocket, a legal document signed by Alara's father, trading his daughter and his land to settle a crippling debt. "She is my property. The boy, too. The law is on my side." "Your law is a cage," Silas countered, his gaze unwavering. "And this land is mine. The people on it are under my protection." Thornton's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to the men behind him. They were farmers, ranchers, men whose faces Silas recognized. Men he knew were just as trapped by Thornton's control over the region's water as Alara's family had been. They clutched their rifles, but their eyes were filled with a weary uncertainty. This was Thornton's power. Not in the guns his men carried, but in the desperation that forced them to carry them. Seeing their hesitation, Silas took a step forward. He wasn't speaking to Thornton anymore. He was speaking to them. "Look at this water," he said, gesturing to the life-giving stream. "There is enough here for all of us. Enough for your families, for your crops. Thornton offers you wages to enforce his scarcity. He pays you to protect the chains that bind you just as surely as they bind everyone else. I am offering you a share, a future." A dangerous seed of doubt had been planted. The men shifted, their loyalty wavering. Thornton saw it, and the mask of civility slipped, revealing the raw, ugly face of his tyranny. Rage twisted his features. He drew his pistol with a vicious speed, not at Silas, but at the one person he knew was defenseless. He aimed it directly at Leo. "Contracts must be honored," he snarled, his voice cracking with fury. "She comes with me now, or the boy pays the price for her defiance." It was a fatal miscalculation. He had threatened a child. He had shown them all that his power was not built on law or order, but on a willingness to destroy innocence for his own gain. In that instant, everything became clear. Before any of Thornton's men could react, Silas moved. He was not a gunman by trade, but he had the speed of a desperate father. He lunged forward, not for his own weapon, but for Thornton's. He slammed the mayor's arm against the wooden corral post. The gun clattered to the dust. The other men stood frozen, their rifles lowered. They looked from the sputtering, disarmed mayor to the resolute rancher standing over him, and they made their choice. They had seen true leadership, and it was not the man who threatened a child. It was the man who had offered to share a miracle. Thornton, defeated and humiliated, was sent away on his horse, a king without a kingdom, his power broken by a trickle of water and a single act of courage. As he disappeared into the dust, the sky, which had been growing dark and bruised, finally broke. The rain began to fall, a cool, cleansing downpour that washed the dust from the air and the fear from their hearts. Alara stepped forward, placing a hand on Silas's arm. Leo came to his other side, taking his hand. The three of them stood together, a small, unlikely trinity, watching the storm. They were a family, forged not by blood, but by a shared fight for survival and a refusal to bow to despair. A few of Thornton's men remained, their hats in their hands, their faces etched with a hesitant hope. One of them spoke, his voice rough. "That offer about the water, was it real?" Silas looked from the man's hopeful face to Alara's, and then to the green shoots in the garden, and he nodded. "We can build something here," he said, his voice filled with a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. "All of us, together. What is a home? Is it the plot of land you own, the wooden frame you build upon it? Or is it the people you choose to stand with, the family you forge in the fires of adversity?" Silas began his journey digging for water to honor a memory, but in the cool, dark earth, he found a reason to build a future. Alara ran from a prison made of contracts and fear, and in the heart of an unforgiving desert, she found a freedom defended by courage and hope. How often do we set out in search of one thing, only to discover something far more valuable waiting for us? When you are faced with your own desert, with your own impossible choice between a gilded cage and a terrifying freedom, which path holds the truer promise? If this story of resilience, of finding life in the most barren of places, moved you, let us know in the comments below. Tell us about a time you found an unexpected sanctuary or an unlikely family. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us that even when we feel most lost, the simple act of reaching out can be the one thing that helps us find our way home.